The oak tree had been dead for 3 weeks when Private First Class Thomas Sullivan crawled beneath it. 7:23 in the morning, December 14th, 1944, Belgium's Hurtgen Forest. German machine gun fire tore through branches 6 feet above Tommy's head, shredding bark and sending splinters into gray winter air like horizontal rain. His platoon was pinned down somewhere behind him, bleeding, screaming, dying. In the next 4 hours, Tommy would kill 18 Wehrmacht soldiers from a position so unorthodox that U.S. Army doctrine explicitly forbade it, a hide no American sniper had ever used, a tactic that violated every rule written in Field Manual 2310. His court-martial would begin exactly 63 days later. But none of that mattered yet. What mattered was frozen mud against his chest, the Springfield rifle pressed against his side, the 6-inch gap between massive oak trunk and frozen earth, the horizontal sight line stretching 200 yards into German territory. What mattered was the blood-stained letter in his breast pocket, his best friend's letter, the one that said, "Follow the rules, come home safe," the one Pat Donnelly had been carrying when he fell 20 feet from a pine tree because the manual said seek elevated positions. The manual had killed Pat. Now Tommy was about to prove the manual wrong. To understand why a 22-year-old from South Philadelphia was lying in frozen mud, preparing to destroy his military career, you need to go back. Back to narrow streets between row houses. Back to November afternoons in the Pine Barrens. Back to the moment two boys learned that sometimes the best way to survive is to think like prey instead of predator. Back to before the war changed everything. South Philadelphia in the 1930s smelled like coal smoke and fresh bread and the salt tang of the Delaware River 3 blocks east. Thomas Sullivan entered the world March 15, 1922, in a row house on Mifflin Street. 3 rooms for 6 people. Walls so thin you could hear neighbors arguing 2 houses down. His father John worked the Navy Yard docks, loading cargo ships bound for Europe, unloading steel and timber, and everything else America needed to build itself. 12-hour shifts that left him silent at dinner, staring at nothing, hands wrapped around coffee that went cold while he forgot to drink. Tommy learned early that some men carried their exhaustion like weights tied to their shoulders. That hard work didn't make you strong. It just made you old before your time. Patrick Donnelly lived 3 blocks over on Moore Street. Born June 19th, same year as Tommy. Their fathers worked the same docks, same shifts, came home with the same 1,000-yard stare that men get when they've seen too many days that look exactly the same. The boys found each other the way kids do in neighborhoods where everyone knows everyone. Playing stickball in the street. Running from the beat cop who didn't really want to catch them anyway. Learning to fight in alleys where backing down meant getting your face split open. By 7, they were inseparable. Where Tommy was quiet and watchful, Pat was all energy and noise. Where Tommy analyzed before acting, Pat jumped in head first and figured things out on the way down. Tommy kept Pat from getting killed by thinking too fast. Pat kept Tommy from overthinking himself into paralysis. They were brothers in every way except blood. At 12, everything changed. Pat's uncle Michael took both boys to the Pine Barrens on a November Saturday. Not for sport, for meat. Depression era. Philadelphia meant you hunted or you went hungry. Simple as that. Uncle Michael drove them 2 hours south in a truck that rattled like it might fall apart on every pothole. The Barrens opened up like another world. Pine trees so dense the sunlight came through green, sandy soil that muffled footsteps, air that smelled like resin and earth, and something wild that didn't exist in the city. They set up before dawn. Uncle Michael positioned them near a game trail, showed them how to read tracks in soft ground, taught them to move through brush without sound, to wait motionless for hours, to understand that deer weren't afraid of you specifically. They were afraid of what you represented. Movement, noise, the smell of cigarettes and cheap whiskey. The critical lesson came on the second day. Tommy and Pat had been scanning the tree line, looking up like they'd seen hunters do in magazines and movies, looking for deer in branches like deer could climb. Uncle Michael's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through their concentration like a knife. "Why you looking up?" Pat started to answer, but Uncle Michael raised a hand for silence. "Deer don't climb. Predators look up. Hawks, owls, humans with rifles standing on 2 legs. Deer look horizontal, eye level. That's where danger lives for them in the wild." Pat laughed quietly. So we should hunt from the ground. Uncle Michael's expression didn't change. Sometimes the best hide is the one nobody expects. Height gives visibility, but it also makes you visible. In dense woods, being low and invisible, it beats being high and exposed every single time. Tommy absorbed this differently than Pat. Tommy thought in three dimensions, about angles, about what predators expected versus what prey needed to survive, about how patterns of behavior could be exploited by anyone smart enough to see them. He didn't know it then, but Uncle Michael had just taught him the tactic that would save 40 American lives in a Belgian forest 8 years later. At 16, Tommy dropped out of school to work. Hog Island shipyard needed riveters. The work was brutal. 12-hour days in all weather. Metal so cold in winter it burned your hands through gloves. So hot in summer you could smell your skin cooking if you touched it wrong. But the work taught patience, waiting for the rivet gun to heat, waiting for the foreman to look away so you could rest 30 seconds, waiting for the right moment to act instead of acting just to be doing something. Every November, Tommy and Pat hunted the barrens together. By 1940, they moved through forests like ghosts, could wait motionless for 4 hours without shifting weight, could take shots other hunters wouldn't risk because they understood wind and distance and how to read an animal's next move before it happened. Pat was good, fearless where Tommy was cautious. But Tommy was patient, and in the barrens, patience beat courage more often than not. December 7th, 1941, was a Sunday. Tommy and Pat were at the Donnelly house. Pat's younger sister, Mary, 15 years old, was teaching them to dance for an upcoming USO event. Not well, but trying. The radio played swing music. Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey. The soundtrack of an America that didn't know it was about to end. The music stopped mid-song. The announcer's voice came through the speaker shaking, actual fear in his tone that you could hear even through the static. We interrupt this program for a special bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air. The attack began approximately 7:55 this morning Hawaii time. The cards Pat had been shuffling fell from his hands. 52 pieces of paper scattering across worn linoleum like snow. Nobody moved to pick them up. The radio continued. Fragments of information. Ships burning. Casualties unknown but heavy. Surprise attack. Declaration of war expected. Pat's father came home 30 minutes later, still in work clothes because the Navy Yard had called an emergency meeting. The look on his face said everything before he spoke. Boys, this means war. You'll both be drafted. Pat tried for optimism despite the fear in his eyes. War'll be over by Christmas. We'll march in victory parades and kiss pretty girls. Tommy said nothing, just thought about systems, about how war was the largest mechanical system humans had ever created. And like all systems, it would break in ways nobody predicted, would need people who understood how to fix what broke when it broke. March 9th, 1943. Tommy and Pat walked to the Army recruiting station on Market Street. 7 other South Philly boys already waiting. All enlisted the same day, all thinking they were ready, none understanding what ready actually meant. At the train station, Mary cried. 16 years old, watching her brother and his best friend board a train to Fort Benning, Georgia. To somewhere dangerous she couldn't fully imagine. She made them promise something impossible. Come home together. Watch each other's backs. Pat hugged her tight. Promise Mary, your brother and Tommy, we're a team. Nothing breaks us up. You hear me? Nothing. Tommy knelt to Mary's level so they were eye to eye. I'll keep him safe, Mary, I promise. That promise haunted him every day for the next 46 years. The train to Georgia took 3 days. Pat talked the entire journey, made friends with every soldier in their car, told stories, shared jokes, drew people out of their fear and uncertainty by being so relentlessly himself that everyone else could relax. Tommy sat by the window watching America pass. Farmland, small towns, mountains, all of it heading towards something none of them could see yet. He thought about rifles, about the M1 Garand, semi-automatic, 8-round en-bloc clip, gas-operated, revolutionary design, could fire 30 rounds per minute in trained hands. But Tommy's mind kept returning to the trigger mechanism, the disconnector that forced the trigger to return fully before the next round could fire. Necessary for safety. Prevented accidental discharge. but it also limited rate of fire in ways that might matter when it mattered most. Fort Benning in summer 1943 was heat like Philadelphia boys had never experienced. Georgia heat pressed down like wet wool, made breathing feel like work. Drill instructors seemed personally offended by their existence. Every mistake earned extra duties. Every hesitation brought corrections, shouted 6 inches from your face. Week 2 brought rifle qualification. The instructor handed Tommy an M1 Garand for the first time. Standard issue, 8 pounds of walnut and steel. Tommy felt the balance immediately. Weight distribution, action movement, the mechanical harmony of how parts fit together. You will fire at targets 200 yards downrange. You will fire all 8 rounds. You will achieve qualifying score of 6 hits minimum. Tommy aimed. The rifle felt correct in his hands. Extension of his body. He understood its geometry without thinking about it. Wind, elevation. The slight pull to the right from a barrel manufacturing tolerance nobody else would notice. He compensated without conscious thought. 8 rounds, 8 center mass hits. Perfect score. The instructor examined the target in silence, then looked at Tommy with something close to suspicion. Lucky. Tommy reloaded without comment, fired again. Same result. 8 rounds, 8 perfect hits. Not luck. Understanding. Pat qualified expert too, but differently. Instinctive shooting, fast target acquisition, natural talent. The instructors noticed, pulled him aside after qualification. By week 6, Pat was selected for advanced sniper training. 8 weeks specialized instruction. Learning to use the Springfield rifle with telescopic sight. Learning doctrine. Field Manual 2310 Sniper Training and Employment. The critical doctrine said elevated positions provide maximum observation. Height equals advantage. Seek high ground. Use trees for vantage points. Dominate the battlefield through elevation. Pat believed it completely. Made perfect sense. See farther from height. Better fields of fire. Harder for enemy to reach you. The manual said it. Instructors with combat experience from North Africa taught it. Must be true. Tommy watched Pat train when he could. Something bothered him about the elevated position doctrine, but he couldn't articulate what. Just instinct from deer hunting. Something about being silhouetted against sky. Something about how predators looked up. But Pat was the trained sniper. Tommy was just infantry. Who was he to question doctrine written by men who'd actually fought letters, started arriving from Margaret Riley, Pat's girlfriend back in Philadelphia? They'd been dating since high school. Margaret worked at a textile factory, wrote beautifully loved Pat with a fierce certainty that came through in every line. Pat read the letters aloud to Tommy, shared everything. Margaret wanted to marry Christmas 1945, wanted Pat home safe, wanted the life they'd planned before the world caught fire. Tommy helped Pat write responses. Pat was better with jokes than prose. Tommy had patience for composition. They'd stay up after lights out, Tommy writing by flashlight, while Pat dictated feelings he couldn't quite put into words. One letter Pat wrote stayed with Tommy forever. Margaret, I think about you every day, about the life we'll have after this is over, about the house we'll buy in Northeast Philly, about teaching our kids to hunt in the barrens like Uncle Michael taught me and Tommy. I'm learning to be a good sniper. The manual says seek high ground, maximum visibility. That's what I'll do. Follow the rules. Come home safe. All my love, Pat. Follow the rules, come home safe. Those words echoed in Tommy's head 3 months later when Pat fell from a tree because the rules were wrong. October 1944. The 28th Infantry Division deployed to Hurtgen Forest. Dense woodland along the German-Belgian border. Trees so thick visibility dropped to 30 yards. German pillboxes invisible until you were dead. Artillery bursts in the canopy sent wood splinters down like javelins. The forest killed men in ways training never covered, in ways doctrine never predicted, in ways that made all the rules seem like suggestions written by people who'd never actually been in woods this dark. Tommy and Pat arrived together, different squads, same company. Company B, 110th Infantry Regiment. They made plans to meet when they could, to watch each other's backs like they'd promised Mary. The first week taught Tommy that American sniper doctrine was built for open terrain, for ridges and farmland and places where you could see your enemy, coming from 1,000 yards away. In the Hurtgen, you couldn't see 30 yards, couldn't hear enemies approaching over the constant sound of artillery and wind through dead trees. But American snipers still climbed, still sought elevation, because the manual said so, because instructors taught it, because nobody had figured out yet that the manual was killing them. November 8th, 1944, 09:15 hours. Pat volunteered for observation mission. German positions near contested crossroads needed mapping. Textbook sniper work. Tommy caught him before patrol left. Be careful up there. Pat grinned in that way that made everyone around him feel better. Manual says elevated observation provides maximum visibility. 20 feet up, I'll see everything. Be back by noon. We'll heat some coffee. He showed Tommy Margaret's latest letter, arrived 2 days before. Pat mother wants to know if Christmas 1945 is too soon for a wedding. I told her nothing is too soon. Come home safe. Follow the rules, I love you. Margaret. Tommy read it, handed it back. You'll be there for that wedding. Just stay smart up in that tree. Pat tucked the letter in his breast pocket. Always do, Tommy. You worry too much. That's why we're such a good team. You worry for both of us. They shook hands. Pat's grip was strong, confident. Sure he'd be back by noon to heat that coffee and talk about wedding plans and the house in Northeast Philly they'd help him buy. 09:47 hours. Tommy was in a foxhole 400 yards from Pat's observation post, cleaning his rifle. Routine maintenance. Thinking about nothing in particular. A single shot cracked through the forest, different sound from the constant background noise. Sharper, higher pitched. Springfield rifle. Then silence. Then voices shouting. Medic, medic. The worst sound in war. The sound that meant someone wasn't getting up. Tommy ran, reached Pat's position 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours later. Found what he'd been afraid he'd find. What some part of him had known he'd find since Pat climbed that tree. Pat had followed doctrine perfectly. Climbed a pine tree 20 feet up. Established excellent observation position. Maximum visibility across the forest floor. Textbook positioning according to everything they had been taught. The German sniper had fired from ground level, somewhere in the undergrowth 200 yards north. One shot, one kill. The German had been invisible in brush and shadow. But Pat had been silhouetted against gray sky, dark shape against light background. Target so obvious a blind man could have hit it. Pat had fallen 20 feet, hit 3 branches on the way down. Body landed in snow in a position that meant things inside were broken in ways that couldn't be fixed. Blood everywhere. Too much blood for any medic to stop. Tommy reached him. Pat was still alive. Barely. Chest wound. Sucking air. Eyes unfocused, but trying to find something to hold on to. Tommy. Pat's voice was barely a whisper. I'm here. Stay with me. Medic's coming. Margaret. Pat coughed. Blood on his lips now. Tell her. Tell her I tried. You're telling her yourself. You're going home, Manuel said. Pat's breathing was shallow, getting more shallow with each word. Elevated position. Maximum visibility. His eyes fixed on something Tommy couldn't see. Something beyond the gray sky and bare branches. Then stopped moving. Stopped focusing on anything at all. Tommy held Pat's body. 22 years of friendship. 2 boys from South Philly who'd hunted deer together and promised to watch each other's backs. Pat had followed the manual, done everything right according to doctrine written by men with college degrees and combat experience, and died because that doctrine was designed for open terrain and failed completely in dense forest. Tommy reached into Pat's pocket, found Margaret's letter, blood-soaked now, barely readable, but he could still make out her words through the red stains. Follow the rules. Come home safe. Tommy put the letter in his own pocket, carried it every day for the rest of his life. Physical reminder that sometimes following rules gets you killed. Something crystallized in Tommy's mind that moment, clear and cold and absolutely certain. Pat died because he was silhouetted against sky. German sniper on ground level had perfect angle shooting upward. Pat couldn't see him through undergrowth. But German had clear shot at dark shape against light background. Uncle Michael's lesson finally made complete sense. Predators look up. Prey looks horizontal. In forest, being high makes you visible. Being low makes you invisible. The manual was wrong, and Tommy was going to prove it. November 19th. Corporal Bobby Martinez set up on ridgeline overlooking the same crossroads Pat had been observing. Elevated position, perfect visibility, 400 yards according to doctrine. German counter-sniper spotted him in 90 minutes. Called mortar fire. Martinez took shrapnel to throat, drowned in his own blood before the medic reached him. November 27th, Sergeant Billy Chen used blown-out farmhouse as sniper nest. Second floor, western window, textbook positioning, killed 3 Germans before Panzerfaust's team obliterated the building. Found Chen's rifle in rubble. Never found enough of Chen to bury. December 2nd, Staff Sergeant David Anderson from Montana. Should have known better. Hunter before the war who understood how animals move through woods. Positioned himself 20 feet up an oak tree, trying to spot German movement near a supply route. Tommy was 50 yards away, prone behind a fallen log, watching Anderson work because something felt wrong. Something felt like it had felt before Pat climbed his tree. The German round hit Anderson in the left eye. He didn't make a sound, just dropped his rifle and fell. Springfield clattered against branches all the way down. Body landed in a heap. One leg bent at an angle. Legs don't bend. Tommy lay motionless for 3 hours watching the tree line. Never saw the German. Never heard movement. The shooter had fired from ground level, somewhere in undergrowth 200 yards east. Perfect concealment. Zero visibility, but perfect shot at elevated target. Tommy realized something that day. Something important. The German wasn't hiding in the forest. The German was the forest. Part of the ground. Part of the shadows and brush and horizontal world where prey lived and survived. December 3rd, morning. Tommy found Captain James Crawford in the command post. Damaged barns serving as temporary headquarters. Crawford was 31. Former high school teacher from Ohio drafted into command after the previous captain took machine gun fire in the face, trying to keep 200 men alive in woods designed to kill them. Sir Tommy said, "The snipers are dying because they're too high." Crawford looked up from maps spread across a table made from ammunition crates. Elevated positions provide visibility. Sullivan, that's doctrine. Doctrine's wrong for this terrain, sir. Germans shoot from forest floor. We climb trees and die. You want to engage from ground level, Crawford's voice carried skepticism. You'll have zero visibility. I'll have concealment, Tommy replied. That matters more here. Crawford shook his head slowly. Manual exists for a reason, Private. Field Manual 2310. Elevated positions. Men with college degrees and combat experience wrote that doctrine. Manual was written for open terrain. Tommy interrupted. This isn't open. Visibility's 30 yards. Trees burst from artillery. Height doesn't help. It kills. Crawford stared at him. You're a rifleman, Sullivan, not a trained sniper. What makes you think you understand tactics better than men who have been doing this since North Africa? Pat Donnelly was a trained sniper, Tommy said quietly. Top of his class, Fort Benning. He followed the manual. He's dead. Bobby Martinez followed it. Dead. Billy Chen, David Anderson. Dead, dead, dead. All because they did what the manual said. I'm asking permission to try something different. And if you get killed doing it, Crawford's tone was flat. Then I'm down one more rifleman. Tommy met his eyes. Pat was my best friend. We grew up 3 blocks apart. Promised his sister we'd watch each other's backs. I failed him because the manual was wrong. If there's a way to keep other men from dying the same way, I need to try. Sir. Crawford was silent for a long moment, looked at Tommy, looked at the maps, looked at casualty reports that kept getting longer every single day. Then he spoke very quietly. I didn't authorize this conversation. Clear, Tommy nodded. Clear, sir. Don't get caught. Crawford's voice was barely audible. And don't miss, that was permission. Unofficial, deniable, but permission. December 12th, Tommy found what he needed during routine patrol. Massive oak tree 60 feet long, blown over by artillery sometime in the past month. Root ball torn free from earth creating depression 15 feet across. Trunk fallen at an angle leaving gap underneath. Maybe 14 inches clearance between trunk and frozen ground. Snow had drifted against the log. Additional concealment. From 30 feet away, it looked like every other fallen tree in the Hurtgen. From 3 feet away, it still looked like every other fallen tree. Tommy crawled underneath. Space was tight, had to worm forward on elbows, dragging rifle beside him. Ground was frozen mud, hard enough to support weight without leaving obvious impressions. The root ball created natural backstop, blocking any silhouette. Trunk itself was 3 feet thick. Solid oak, would stop machine gun fire, would stop anything short of direct artillery hit. He positioned himself facing north toward German lines. Through the gap between trunk and ground, he had horizontal sight line across forest floor, maybe 6 inches of viewing angle, but it stretched for 200 yards. He could see bases of trees, undergrowth, small rises and depressions in terrain. Could not see sky, could not see anything above 4 feet in height. Perfect. Tommy spent 3 hours under that log, not moving, just watching, learning the sector. Saw a deer pick its way through snow 90 yards out. Saw 2 German soldiers walk past close enough to hear them talking about home, about Leipzig, about whether the war would end before spring. Neither German looked down. Why would they? Men fought at eye level. Threats came from elevation, from tree lines, from ridges. Nobody expected danger from the forest floor. Nobody thought like prey instead of predator. Tommy crawled back to American lines after dark, uniform caked with frozen mud, hands numb even through gloves. But he knew it would work. Knew it with the same certainty he'd known Pat was going to die the moment he climbed that tree. The question wasn't whether the tactic would work. The question was whether the Army would let Tommy live long enough to prove it, whether doctrine could bend before it broke more good men, whether rules mattered more than results. December 13th, evening. Tommy told Crawford he'd found a position, didn't explain details. Crawford didn't ask. Radio check every 2 hours. If you miss a check, I'm sending a patrol. Understood, sir. And Sullivan. Crawford's voice was quiet, tired. If this works, I never gave you permission. If it doesn't work, I definitely never gave you permission. Clear, yes, sir. December 14th, 0430 hours. Tommy moved into position 90 minutes before dawn. Complete darkness, navigated by memory and feel, dragging Springfield rifle and canvas bag with 300 rounds. He wore every piece of cold weather gear the Army issued. Wool sweater under field jacket, under overcoat. Knew it wouldn't be enough. Ground level in December. Moisture seeping through cloth. No movement to generate heat. He'd be hypothermic in 4 hours if this lasted that long. He settled into position, packed snow against gaps around his body to eliminate any silhouette, pulled canvas over the rifle to prevent light reflecting off metal, then waited. Dawn came slow, gray light filtering through canopy, turning black forest into endless shades of gray and brown. Tommy lay motionless, breathing slowly through his nose so breath wouldn't fog in cold air. Watching his sector, watching German positions somewhere between 200 and 400 yards north. At 0723, the German machine gun opened fire somewhere east. American voices shouting, rifle fire returning in scattered bursts. His platoon was pinned, and Tommy was about to do something that would either save them all or earn him 5 years in Leavenworth military prison. He touched Pat's blood-stained letter in his breast pocket one more time, thought about promises made at train stations, about Mary crying, about following rules versus staying alive. Then his finger found the trigger, and the impossible defense began. The first shot left the barrel at 7:23 and 15 seconds. The sound was wrong, not the sharp crack of a Springfield rifle, but something muffled and distorted. The trunk above Tommy's head absorbed part of the report, bent. It made it echo through the forest in ways that defied normal acoustics. The sound seemed to come from 3 places at once. 220 yards downrange, a German officer standing in the open lurched backward. His binoculars fell from his hands. He was dead before his body hit the snow. Confusion rippled through the German formation like a stone thrown into still water. Officers began shouting, hands pointed in different directions. Where had the shot originated? What were they facing? Tommy did not pause to observe the effect. His training took over. Work the bolt, eject the spent casing. It bounced off the underside of the oak trunk, landed in frozen mud beside his face. Chamber another round. Find the next target. Through the scope, he saw them scatter, but not toward cover, toward positions that made sense if you thought the threat came from elevation, from tree lines, from ridges. They were looking up, just like Pat had taught them in training. Just like doctrine said, Tommy fired again, and again, and again. 4 more shots in 8 seconds. Speed that shouldn't be possible with a bolt-action rifle, but Tommy had been working bolts since he was 12. Knew the rhythm, knew how to make the metal sing. 5 Germans fell in the snow. 2 radio operators distinctive by the antenna packs on their backs. 1 captain directing infantry with aggressive hand gestures. 2 sergeants organizing the advance with whistles and shouted commands. The German infantry did what training demanded. They dove for cover. The neat formations that had looked parade ground perfect moments before dissolved into scattered clusters behind trees and snowbanks. The advance that had been moving with mechanical precision ground to a halt. Tommy worked the bolt again. Scanned through the scope. Waited. He could hear American voices behind him. Crawford on the radio calling for artillery support that wouldn't come. The machine guns still chattering somewhere east. Men screaming for medics. The sounds of his platoon dying while he lay in frozen mud, doing the only thing he could do. Buying them time. Movement at 180 yards. German squad attempting flanking maneuver to the right. 7 soldiers moving between trees in bounds that showed professional training. Leapfrogging. Covering each other. Textbook small unit tactics. Tommy tracked the lead soldier. Adjusted for wind, for distance, for the slight downward angle from his elevated position. Squeezed the trigger. The German dropped instantly. Tommy worked the bolt. Fired. Another German fell. Bolt. Fire. 3rd soldier went down clutching his leg. The remaining 4 scrambled back to their original positions. Flanking attempt abandoned before it truly began. Tommy's radio crackled. Sullivan to Crawford. 5 confirmed. No contact on my position. Silence. Then Crawford's voice tight with something between disbelief and hope. Jesus Christ, Sullivan. Where the hell are you, ground level? Under fallen oak. Long pause. Say again. I'm prone under fallen tree. 3-foot thick trunk. They can't see me. Another pause. You're insane. I'm alive, Tommy said. They're not. The German response came at 8:15. Through his scope, Tommy saw a new unit arriving at the German position. Different uniforms. Distinctive field gray with markings he recognized from intelligence briefings. Wehrmacht Feldgendarmerie, military police, battlefield forensics specialists. Tommy watched them work. 1 soldier used a theodolite, surveying equipment normally employed by engineers. Another measured angles with a protractor and string. A 3rd made notes on a map marking points and drawing lines with methodical precision. They were triangulating his position through mathematics and physics. Given enough time and enough data points, they would calculate exactly where he was firing from. But the German advance continued despite the confusion. Large group of 30-plus soldiers preparing for coordinated rush toward American lines. Officers reorganizing, sergeants shouting encouragement, whistles ready to signal the charge. Tommy fired before they could begin. 6 rounds targeting leaders. Mix of officers and sergeants. The advance broke apart before starting. Men scattering back to cover. Momentum lost before it could build. 8:58. Radio check. Sullivan to Crawford. 10 confirmed. No contact on my position. Copy. Fall back if they locate you. Negative. Still have ammunition. Still buying time. Tommy watched the Feldgendarmerie team through his scope. They were pointing now, not randomly, pointing directly at the area where his hide was located. 1 examined a map with a ruler. Another used ranging equipment to measure distances. A 3rd spoke urgently into a radio. They had calculated his position. Artillery would follow. Tommy knew this with absolute certainty. Knew he had maybe 5 minutes before 88mm shells turned his world into fire and shrapnel. But 5 minutes was 5 minutes, and his platoon was still pinned. Movement to his left, machine gun team repositioning. 3 men carrying an MG-42 and ammunition boxes. Moving fast, professional, trying to get better angle on the withdrawing Americans. Tommy led the first carrier, adjusted for movement, fired. The man dropped the machine gun and fell. The other 2 dove for cover. Tommy worked the bolt, fired, missed high. 3rd round caught one of them in the leg. He went down screaming. The remaining German grabbed the machine gun, ran dragging it toward cover. Tommy fired, hit him in the back. The German dropped the weapon. Fell forward into snow. Didn't move again. 13 confirmed. At 9:07, the German artillery opened fire. 388mm shells in precise succession. High explosive. The ground erupted where Tommy's muzzle flashes had been spotted, where the Feldgendarmerie calculations said he should be. But Tommy had crawled backward 15 yards 5 minutes earlier, behind different cover, watching through undergrowth as his original position disintegrated. The oak log he'd been under shattered, splinters flying like knives, snow and frozen earth erupting in geyser of force, concussive waves that Tommy could feel in his chest even from this distance. If he'd stayed, he'd be dead, vaporized, body parts scattered across 50 yards of frozen forest. But he was alive, and the Germans thought the sniper was destroyed. Artillery had done its job, position eliminated, threat neutralized. Tommy waited 10 minutes. Let them believe it. Let them think they'd won. Then he fired again from his new position. German officer at 200 yards organizing renewed assault. Through the scope, Tommy could see his mouth moving, shouting orders, pointing, directing traffic. Tommy centered the crosshairs, adjusted for range, breathed out slowly, squeezed. The officer dropped instantly, falling backward into snow. His runners scattered. 14 confirmed. The German advance stalled again. Their commander was down. Machine gun teams were suppressed. The coordination needed for successful assault kept breaking apart every time they tried to rebuild it. At 10:47, another machine gun team tried repositioning. 3 men carrying MG-42 toward better firing position, moving in short rushes, using available cover. Tommy dropped the first at 190 yards. Second made it 10 more yards before Tommy's round caught him in the shoulder. Third grabbed the weapon and ran. Tommy fired, hit him center mass. The German fell forward, machine gun clattering against frozen ground. 17 confirmed. The cold was winning now. Tommy could feel it in his core, in his extremities, fingers barely responding to commands. Toes numb inside boots, shivering that he couldn't control. Hypothermia setting in right on schedule. He flexed his fingers, tried to maintain feeling. Knew he had maybe 30 more minutes before fine motor control failed completely. Before he couldn't work the bolt, couldn't aim, couldn't do anything except lie here and freeze. At 11:27, Tommy saw his last target, German officer moving forward with 2 runners, trying to coordinate what remained of the assault. The officer was shouting, pointing, attempting to restore order to chaos. 200 yards out, partially obscured by undergrowth. But Tommy could see enough. He centered the crosshairs on the officer's chest, adjusted slightly for range, for the wind that had picked up in the last hour. Breathed out slowly through cold lips. Fired. The officer dropped instantly, falling backward into snow. Runners scattered. 18 confirmed. Tommy lay still, watching, waiting for return fire that didn't come. The German assault had collapsed. Their officers were down. Machine gun teams were scattered. The coordination needed to overwhelm the American line was gone. He keyed his radio, Sullivan to Crawford, platoon clear to withdraw, count 18 enemy down. Silence. Then Crawford's voice quiet. 18, confirmed, pulling back now. Tommy began the slow process of extraction. He couldn't just stand up and run. That would silhouette him against the forest, make him visible. Everything he'd accomplished would be wasted if he got shot crawling out. He had to go backward, slow, careful, dragging his rifle and empty canvas bag, staying below the log line, moving inches at a time. It took 20 minutes to move 30 yards. His body screamed with cold, muscles locked, fingers barely functional. But he was alive. He reached the American line at 11:53. Soldiers stared as he emerged from undergrowth, caked head to toe in frozen mud, face pale with cold. Moving like an old man, despite being 22. Crawford was waiting, watching Tommy stagger to his feet with help from 2 riflemen. 18, Crawford said. From ground level, under a fallen oak. 4 hours. Yes, sir. Crawford stared. Get to the aid station. You're hypothermic. The medic stripped Tommy's frozen uniform, wrapped him in every blanket available, forced hot coffee into him that he could barely hold with shaking hands. Core temperature 94 degrees. Borderline severe hypothermia. Another hour and Tommy would have been unconscious. 2 hours and he'd be dead. He sat there shaking, not from fear, from cold that had penetrated so deep it felt like it would never leave. While soldiers crowded around asking questions. How'd you do it? Where were you positioned? How many did you really get? Can you teach us? Tommy didn't answer, just drank coffee, waited for the shaking to stop, thought about Pat, about following rules versus staying alive, about 18 Germans who'd never go home because Tommy had learned to think like prey instead of predator. Word spread fast. By evening, every rifleman in Company B knew Tommy Sullivan had killed 18 Germans from a hide so well concealed that nobody had spotted him. By next morning, soldiers from other companies were asking questions. By December 16th, 3 other riflemen had tried the same tactic. December 18th, Private Marcus Webb used a hollow log to ambush a German patrol, killed 4 before the survivors retreated, came back hypothermic but alive. December 21st, Corporal Sam Rodriguez positioned himself under a root ball, took out a machine gun team that had pinned his platoon for 6 hours, eliminated 3 Germans, saved a dozen American lives. The tactic spread quietly, man to man, whispered conversations in foxholes and aid stations. No officers ordered it, no training manual described it. It just happened the way innovations always happened in war. From necessity, from frustration, from men who refused to die following doctrine that didn't work. December 23rd, Oberleutnant Klaus Richter of the 275th Infantry Division wrote in his after-action report something that would later be declassified and analyzed by military historians. American sniper tactics have changed, fire now originating from ground-level positions, making counter-sniper operations extremely difficult. Traditional elevated search patterns ineffective. Recommend increased use of indirect fire and systematic clearing of fallen timber. German snipers began checking ground-level positions, but it was too late. The Americans had adapted faster. By January 1945, forest floor sniper hides were being used throughout the Hurtgen. The technique was spreading to other units, other forests, other fronts. The German 300th Volksgrenadier Division reported sniper casualties increased 47% in January compared to December. The Americans were invisible. German doctrine couldn't counter what they couldn't see. But Tommy Sullivan never got credit for what he'd started. Instead, he got arrested. February 15th, 1945. Military police arrived at battalion headquarters while Tommy was cleaning his rifle. 2 MPs with sidearms and expressions that meant business. Private First Class Sullivan. You're under arrest. Charges are unauthorized modification of sniper doctrine, violation of Field Manual 2310, and conduct unbecoming. You need to come with us now. Tommy didn't resist. Had known this was coming since December 14th, since the moment he crawled under that oak tree and violated every rule written in the manual. He set down his rifle, stood, let them cuff him, walked to the jeep without looking back at the men he'd saved. February 19th. The court-martial convened at division headquarters in Luxembourg. Tommy stood before 3 officers, a colonel, a major, a captain. None of them had been in the Hurtgen. None of them had watched men die following doctrine that didn't work. The colonel read the charges. His voice was flat, professional, completely devoid of emotion. Private First Class Sullivan, you are accused of willfully disregarding established sniper procedure, endangering yourself and your unit through reckless tactical decisions, undermining military discipline by encouraging other soldiers to violate training standards. How do you plead guilty? The colonel blinked. You admit to these charges? Yes, sir. I violated the manual, used ground-level positions, told other men how to do it. The major leaned forward. Do you understand that sniper doctrine exists to maximize effectiveness while minimizing risk? I understand the doctrine got men killed, Tommy said. His voice was steady. Pat Donnelly, Bobby Martinez, and Billy Chen, David Anderson, all dead because they followed the manual. The manual has been developed over years of combat experience. Not forest combat, Tommy interrupted. Not the Hurtgen. That manual was written for open terrain. The forest different. The manual was wrong. The captain spoke up. Even if your tactic was effective, which is disputed, you had no authority to make that decision. You're a private, you follow orders. I've followed Captain Crawford's orders. He told me not to get caught and not to miss. I didn't miss. The colonel's jaw tightened. Captain Crawford denies giving you any such order. Tommy nodded. Yes, sir. He has to. I understand that. Silence in the room. The three officers exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. The major spoke again. Your kill count from December 14th is listed as 18 confirmed. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. From a single position. Yes, sir. Using a technique explicitly forbidden by doctrine. Yes, sir. Another silence. Longer this time. The colonel looked at papers in front of him, looked at Tommy, looked at the papers again. Let me understand, the colonel said slowly. You, a private with no sniper training, decided established doctrine was wrong. Developed a completely new tactic, implemented it without authorization, then taught it to other soldiers. Tommy met his eyes. Pat Donnelly had sniper training, sir. Top of his class, Fort Benning. He followed doctrine, died following it. I watched my best friend fall 20 feet from a tree because the manual said seek elevated positions. The manual was wrong. I fixed it. You fixed it. The colonel's voice carried something between disbelief and anger. You, a private from Philadelphia who hunted deer. Yes, sir. Deer taught me that predators look up. Prey looks horizontal. In dense forest, height makes you a target. Ground level makes you invisible. Germans knew this. We didn't. Cost us 4 trained snipers and dozens of riflemen. I stopped it. By violating direct orders. By keeping a promise to a dying friend. Tommy pulled Pat's blood-stained letter from his pocket, unfolded it carefully. The paper was stiff with dried blood. Fragile with age and handling, he read aloud. Follow the rules. Come home safe. Pat followed the rules. He's dead. I broke them. I'm alive. So are 40 other men using my technique. The colonel stared at the letter, at the bloodstains, at Tommy's face. Private Sullivan, you will be remanded to custody pending sentencing. This court stands adjourned. Tommy spent 3 days in the division stockade. Small cell, thin mattress, bad food. Time to think about what he'd done and whether it was worth it. February 22nd, Captain Crawford visited, stood outside the cell with hands in his pockets, face unreadable. They're going to bust you to private, maybe give you 30 days. Tommy nodded. Could be worse. Could be better if you'd kept your mouth shut, Crawford said. Couldn't do that, sir. Crawford was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. Marcus Webb got 6 kills yesterday using your method. Sam Rodriguez got 3 more. Your technique works, Sullivan. Everyone knows it works, but it's not in the manual, Tommy said. Not yet, Crawford replied. Maybe after the war. Tommy shrugged. Doesn't matter to me. Crawford studied him. You really don't care, do you? I care about Pat, Tommy said, and Bobby, and Billy, and David Anderson. I care that they died following rules that didn't work. If I can stop that from happening to someone else, I don't care what the Army does to me. Crawford nodded slowly. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Tell that to the colonel. Crawford smiled slightly. I didn't help. February 24th. Tommy stood before the 3 officers again. The colonel read the sentence without emotion, without looking at Tommy directly. This court sentences you to reduction in rank to private, 30 days confinement, forfeiture of 1 month's pay. This court recognizes that your actions resulted in enemy casualties and arguably protected American lives. However, military discipline cannot be maintained if soldiers unilaterally disregard established doctrine. This sentence serves as warning to others who might consider similar violations. Tommy served his 30 days. March 1945 in the stockade, eating bad food, sleeping on a thin mattress. While the war moved east without him, while other men used his technique, while soldiers lived who would have died following doctrine, he didn't care about the cell, didn't care about the bad food, didn't care about being busted to private or losing a month's pay. Pat was still dead, Bobby Martinez, Billy Chen, David Anderson, all still dead because they'd followed rules written by men who'd never fought in woods like the Hurtgen. But Marcus Webb was alive. Sam Rodriguez was alive. 40 other men were alive because Tommy had spent 4 hours in frozen mud proving the manual wrong. That was enough. That was always enough. That's what Pat would have said if he could say anything at all. Tommy lay on the thin mattress, held Pat's blood-stained letter, read the words he'd memorized months ago. Follow the rules. Come home safe. Some rules were meant to be broken. Some safety came from thinking different. Some promises were kept by refusing to let others die the same way. That was the truth the manual couldn't teach. The lesson doctrine couldn't contain. The knowledge that came from watching your best friend fall from a tree because everyone said up was safe and down was death. Tommy Sullivan knew better. Cost him 30 days. Cost him his rank. Cost him nothing that mattered. Saved 40 lives. Maybe more. That was the math that counted. That was the equation that made sense. In the darkness of the stockade, Tommy closed his eyes. Thought about oak trees and frozen mud and 18 Germans who'd never go home. Thought about Pat climbing that pine. About promises made at train stations. About rules versus results. And slept. March 26, 1945. Tommy walked out of the stockade into spring sunshine that felt wrong on his skin. The war had moved on without him. Gone east, chasing Germans back into Germany, finishing what had started at Normandy almost a year before. They reassigned him to a replacement depot, processing paperwork, sorting equipment, jobs for soldiers who weren't trusted in combat anymore, jobs that kept you away from anything that mattered. Tommy didn't complain, just did the work, counted days, waited. May 8th, victory in Europe. Germany surrendered. The war everyone said would last forever was suddenly over. Soldiers celebrated, drank whatever alcohol they could find, kissed nurses, sang songs, acted like men who'd just been given their lives back. Tommy sat alone, thought about Pat, about 18 Germans in the snow, about rules and results, and whether any of it had mattered. July brought demobilization, processing out, medical examinations, paperwork declaring him fit to return to civilian life, as if fitness could be measured, as if you could just check boxes and be normal again. August 23rd, Tommy stepped off the train at Penn Station, Philadelphia, wearing his uniform one last time, carrying a duffel bag with everything the Army let him keep, which wasn't much. His father, John, was waiting. Looked older than Tommy remembered. Grayer, more stooped. The years had been hard on him, too. They shook hands, didn't hug. That wasn't how men did things back then. "You all right?" "Yeah," Tommy said. "I'm all right." They walked home through streets Tommy had grown up in, past row houses that looked exactly the same, corner stores, vacant lots where kids played stickball. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Tommy stopped outside the Donnelly house, stood on the sidewalk for 10 minutes before finding courage to knock. Pat's mother answered, her face aged beyond her years. Pat's father sitting silent in the living room, like furniture that had forgotten how to move. Mary was there, 19 now, no longer the girl who'd made them promise to watch each other's backs. A woman who'd lost her brother and learned that some promises can't be kept no matter how hard you try. "You came home," Mrs. Donnelly said. She didn't cry. Looked like she'd run out of tears years ago. Pat didn't. "I'm sorry," Tommy said. "I tried to keep him safe. I know you did. Pat wrote about you, said you were brothers." Tommy spent 2 hours telling stories. Funny ones. Safe ones. Nothing about elevated positions. Nothing about doctrine that killed good men. Nothing about Pat falling from a tree because everyone said up was safe. He told them Pat was brave, that death was quick. The lies soldiers tell families because truth serves no purpose except creating pain no one needs to carry. As he left, Mrs. Donnelly gave him something wrapped in cloth. "Pat wanted you to have this if anything happened." Tommy unwrapped it. Pat's hunting rifle from the Pine Barrens, the Winchester they'd used together for 8 years, learning to think like prey instead of predator. Tommy couldn't speak, just held the rifle, nodded, left before the tears came. He went back to the Navy Yard. Ships still needed building even with the war over. Riveting hulls, 12-hour days, work that required hands but not much thought, which was good because thinking led places Tommy didn't want to go. 1948. Tommy had saved enough money, Opened Sullivan's Auto Repair 3 blocks from where he'd grown up. Small garage, 2 bays, room for one helper when business was good. He fixed cars, changed oil, rebuilt transmissions. Work he understood. Metal and mechanics. Problems with solutions you could see and touch. Different from war where nothing made sense and solutions got you court-martialed. People asked about the war sometimes. Neighbors who'd heard stories. Customers who saw discharge papers framed on the office wall. I was in the infantry, Tommy would say. Did my job. Came home. Never mentioned the Hurtgen. Never mentioned 18 kills. Never mentioned 30 days in the stockade for saving 40 lives. What was the point, they wouldn't understand. Nobody who hadn't been there could understand. 1952. Tommy met Catherine Murphy at a church social. Kate. She worked at Woolworth's 5 and Dime on Market Street. Quiet woman, kind eyes, smiled like she meant it. First date over coffee, she asked if he wanted to talk about the war. No, okay. Tommy thought he could love her for that alone, for not pressing. For understanding some doors stayed closed, not because you wanted them to, but because opening them let things out you couldn't put back. They married that fall, bought a house in Northeast Philadelphia, had 2 kids by 1956. Michael named after Pat's uncle who taught them to hunt. Sarah named after Kate's mother who'd passed before they met. Tommy coached Little League. Fixed neighborhood kids' bikes for free. Attended church every Sunday. To neighbors, he was just another quiet veteran. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that stood out. Every December 14th, he called in sick. Drove to the war memorial where Pat's name was carved in stone. Body buried in Netherlands American Cemetery, but stone with his name in Philadelphia. Tommy sat for hours, talked to Pat about the year, about Kate and the kids, about keeping promises. Every December 26th, the phone rang. Sam Rodriguez calling from New Mexico. They talked about weather, about families, about work. Never directly about the Hurtgen. Both understood what remained unspoken. 1957, September. Customer brought his car in for brake work. Man's son was serving in Korea, had a copy of the updated Army Field Manual, 2310. Tommy flipped through it while the car was on the lift. Curious what changes they'd made since the war, reached Chapter 6. Section 4. New subsection he didn't remember from training. Employment of ground-level concealment in forest terrain. Tommy read it once, read it again, read it a third time because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The manual described use of fallen timber root balls, natural depressions, as sniper hides in dense woodland. Cited effectiveness studies from Hurtgen Forest. Recommended the technique for situations where traditional elevated positions were untenable. Every word was his technique, his innovation. Developed under a fallen oak, December 14, 1944, while freezing to death in frozen mud. The manual did not mention Thomas Sullivan, did not mention December 14th, did not mention court-martial or 30 days in the stockade, just said field innovations during World War II demonstrated effectiveness. Tommy stood in his garage holding that manual, hands shaking, not from anger, from something colder. Recognition of a truth he should have known, should have expected. They'd taken it, made it official doctrine, taught it to every sniper, and erased him completely. That evening, Kate found him in the garage, sitting in darkness, manual open on the workbench under a single bare bulb. What's wrong, Tommy showed her. Read the relevant sections aloud. Explained what it meant. That's your technique, Kate said. The one you got in trouble for. Yes, and they put it in the manual. Made it official. Yes, without crediting you, yes. Kate was quiet for a long moment. Does it matter, you saved lives? Tommy touched Pat's blood-stained letter. Still carried it in his wallet after 12 years. Still blood-stained. Still fragile. Pat's dead. Bobby, Billy, David. Their names aren't in there either. Just says field innovations, like it happened by accident, like men didn't die for it. Kate put her hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing, Tommy. The manual doesn't change that. Manual says I was wrong, Tommy replied. That's why they court-martialed me. Now the manual says I was right, but doesn't say my name. Just takes it, like I never existed. Dozens of soldiers are alive because of you. Tommy closed the manual, put it aside. And the Army gave me 30 days in the stockade for it. then stole what I learned. That's the story. That's what they did. Kate hugged him, let him sit with the anger and resignation, understanding there was nothing to be done. Innovation had been stolen. Credit erased. That was how things worked when you were a private from Philadelphia and they were the United States Army. Tommy never opened that manual again, but he remembered every word, every missing attribution, every erased name. 1961. Man walked into Sullivan's Auto Repair, maybe 40 years old, confident bearing, military haircut growing out. You Tommy Sullivan used to be 110 Infantry. Yeah, who's asking? Name's Charlie Foster. I was in the Hurtgen, December 44. Used your technique. Ground level hide under fallen spruce. Killed 3 Germans trying to overrun our position. Probably saved my life, Tommy nodded. Glad it worked. Charlie extended his hand. Just wanted to say thank you. Been meaning to track you down for years. They shook hands. Charlie left. Tommy went back to work on the Chrysler he'd been rebuilding. Similar encounters happened every few years. Men who'd used the technique, who'd survived because of it, who wanted to say thanks, wanted to say. Tommy always responded the same way. Glad it worked. Glad you made it home. Never elaborated, never told the full story. What was the point they'd survived? That was enough. 1967. Woman came to the garage, late 40s, still beautiful despite the years showing around her eyes. Are you Tommy Sullivan, Pat Donnelly's friend? Tommy's hands stilled on the engine he was working on, grease up to his elbows, heart suddenly pounding. Yes, I'm Tommy. I'm Margaret, Pat's fiancée. We were supposed to marry Christmas 45. Tommy wiped his hands on a rag, set down his tools. The words stuck in his throat for a moment. I'm sorry. Pat talked about you constantly, showed me your letters. Margaret smiled sadly. He wrote about you too, said you were brothers, that you'd watch each other's backs. I tried. Tommy's voice was barely a whisper. I failed. She shook her head. Pat died following rules. You broke rules and lived. He wouldn't blame you for that. Tommy showed her Pat's letter. Still in his wallet after 22 years. Still bloodstained. Still fragile as old paper gets. You carried this the entire war. Entire life, Tommy said. Margaret read it, tears streaming down her face. You carried this entire war, entire life. Margaret left after an hour, but knowing Pat's fiancé had found some kind of peace helped. Slightly. Not much, but slightly. November 11th, 1973. Veterans Day. Tommy attended the ceremony in Philadelphia, wearing a suit, hands in his pockets. Politicians giving speeches about sacrifice and service that sounded hollow to anyone who'd actually been there. After the ceremony, an older man approached, wearing an infantry veteran's cap. You Tommy Sullivan? Yeah, I'm Sam Rodriguez. I was in 110 Company C. We used your technique in the Hurtgen. Tommy nodded. I remember the name. I wanted to say thank you. Sam's voice was emotional, catching on words. You saved my life. Probably saved a lot of lives. Tommy looked uncomfortable. Just did what needed doing. You got court-martialed for it, Sam said. That's more than just doing what needed doing. That's courage. Tommy shook his head. Courage was Pat climbing that tree knowing it might kill him. I just figured out a better way. Sam smiled. That's what courage looks like in war. Not the dramatic stuff, the quiet decisions. Then Sam pulled out a photograph, worn at the edges from being carried. 3 generations. Sam himself, 2 sons, 4 grandchildren, 7 people in total. This is why I wanted to find you. My boys, my grandkids. They exist because I survived the Hurtgen, because I used your technique December 21st, 1944, root ball hide, eliminated machine gun team. If I'd been in a tree like Doctrine said, I'd be dead. No sons, no grandchildren. This whole family wouldn't exist. Tommy stared at the photograph. 7 people, 3 generations. Existing because he'd broken rules 29 years before Sam used the technique. Sam continued. I asked around after the war. Found out you got 30 days in the stockade. Found out the Army put your technique in the manual without crediting you. That's wrong. That's deeply wrong. Tommy handed the photograph back. System doesn't credit privates. Credits doctrine. That's how it works. Doesn't make it right. They shook hands. Sam never saw Tommy again, but that photograph haunted Tommy for years. 7 lives, one family, existing because he defied doctrine. How many others? How many families existed because Marcus or Charlie or hundreds of others had survived using forest floor hides? Tommy would never know. Numbers lost to history, but that was legacy, not medals or recognition, just families continuing, children being born, lives being lived. That had to be enough because it was all there was. March 8, 1989. Tommy was 67, working under a customer's Chevy at Sullivan's Auto Repair. Routine brake job, nothing complicated. Work he'd done 10,000 times. Massive heart attack. Sudden, dead within minutes. Did the way he'd lived. Under a car, wrench in hand, doing work he understood. March 12th. Funeral at St. Joseph's Catholic Church. Well attended. Neighbors, customers, family. Color guard from local VFW post fired a salute over the casket, folded the flag, gave it to Kate. The obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer was 4 paragraphs long, mentioned his garage, his family, his service in World War II, said he'd been awarded the Bronze Star, didn't say why, didn't mention the Hurtgen Forest, didn't mention 18 Germans or court-martial or the technique that changed sniper doctrine, just the bare facts of existence. Born, lived, died. That was all most people got. That was all Tommy expected. Buried in Veterans Cemetery outside Philadelphia. One white marker among thousands. Listed his name, his rank, private, not private first class. They'd never restored it. Dates of service, death date, nothing else. No mention of Bronze Star, no mention of innovation. Just name and numbers and dates. 1994, 5 years after Tommy died. Dr. Elizabeth Manning was researching sniper tactics in the European theater for her dissertation. Military historian at Georgetown, looking for something original, something that hadn't been studied to death. She found references in German after-action reports to American ground-level sniper positions in the Hurtgen Forest. Something that didn't match American doctrine, something that seemed to have emerged spontaneously in December 1944. She cross-referenced American records, found Captain Crawford's unit reports from December, discovered the 18 confirmed kills on December 14th, traced the incident back to Thomas Sullivan, found the court-martial transcript in archives that most historians never bothered checking. 1996, Dr. Manning published her findings in the Journal of Military History, article titled Tactical Innovation at the Individual Level, the Forest Floor, Sniper Hide, and the Hurtgen Forest Campaign. Described Tommy's technique in detail, analyzed its effectiveness, traced its adoption throughout the American infantry, estimated that Tommy Sullivan's unauthorized tactical innovation had saved between 40 and 70 American lives during the winter of 1944 through 45. Nobody read it except other historians. Dr. Manning sent a copy to Kate. Letter explained her findings. Estimated lives saved. Noted the court-martial and lack of official recognition. Kate was 74, reading about her husband's war service for the first time, learning he'd saved 40 to 70 lives, learning he'd been punished for it, learning the Army had stolen his innovation without credit. She gathered her children, Michael now 43, Sarah now 41, read them the article over coffee in the kitchen where Tommy had read that manual 39 years before. Dad never told us any of this, Michael said. That sounds like Dad, Sarah replied. Do the right thing. Don't talk about it. Kate visited Tommy's grave with the article, laid it on the headstone. White marble that said nothing except his name and rank and dates. You finally got recognized, Tommy. 40 years too late, 7 years after you died. But someone knows now, someone wrote it down. Wind blew across the cemetery. Below Philadelphia spread out. Above clouds moved across gray sky. Small American flag fluttered at Tommy's grave. 2003, Army Special Operations Sniper Course at Fort Benning added forest floor concealment techniques to their curriculum. Instructors taught students to use fallen timber root balls, ground depressions as hide sites in woodland environments. Technique considered standard doctrine by 2005. Training manuals credited field innovations during World War II. Without naming individuals, without mentioning Thomas Sullivan or Pat Donnelly or any of the men who'd figured it out by watching other men die. Today, snipers around the world use the technique Tommy invented under a fallen oak, December 14, 1944. They position themselves at ground level, invisible in undergrowth, waiting with patience. Tommy learned hunting deer in the Pine Barrens. They don't know his name, don't know his story, just know the technique works. Tommy's grave still sits in that veteran cemetery outside Philadelphia. Standard white marble headstone among thousands. Lists Thomas Sullivan, March 15, 1922 to March 8, 1989. Private U.S. Army. Served 1943 through 1945. Doesn't mention Bronze Star. Doesn't mention Hurricane Forest. Doesn't mention 18 kills or 40 to 70 lives saved, or a court-martial for heroism, or Army stealing his innovation. Just name, rank that was never restored, dates. But in forests around the world, his technique lives on. In training manuals that don't mention him. In soldiers who survive because they learned to think like prey instead of predator. In families that exist because fathers came home. This is how innovation actually happens in war. Not through engineering studies or committee decisions or revised doctrine written by men with college degrees. Through enlisted men like Tommy Sullivan who watch their friends die and refuse to accept it, who violate the manual because the manual is wrong, who risk court-martial because some things matter more than regulations. Pat Donnelly mattered. Bobby Martinez, Billy Chen, David Anderson. They all mattered. Tommy Sullivan, working alone in frozen mud under a fallen oak, figured out how to keep other men from dying the same way. The Army gave him 30 days in the stockade for it, then stole his innovation without credit. History gave him nothing until 7 years after he died, and even then just an academic article nobody read. But in forests around the world, snipers still use what Tommy taught them. Forest floor hides, ground-level concealment, patience learned from hunting deer, thinking like prey to survive like predators never could. They position themselves low, invisible, waiting for the right moment, just like Tommy did December 14, 1944. They don't know they're using Tommy Sullivan's technique. Don't know about the private from Philadelphia who got court-martialed for saving lives. Don't know about Pat falling from a tree. About promises made at train stations. About blood-stained letters carried for 46 years. They just know it works. And somewhere in whatever place mechanics and hunters and soldiers go after death, Tommy Sullivan is satisfied with that. Not recognition, not credit, not medals or praise or his name in manuals, just knowledge that the technique works, that soldiers survive using it, that families exist because fathers came home. 7 people in Sam Rodriguez's family photograph. 3 generations existing because Sam used a forest floor hide, December 21st, 1944. How many other families, how many soldiers came home, how many children were born, how many grandchildren exist because Tommy defied doctrine, numbers lost to history. But the legacy lives on, in every sniper who positions themselves low instead of high, in every soldier who questions doctrine that doesn't match reality, in every person who understands that sometimes breaking rules saves lives. That's Tommy Sullivan's legacy. Not fame, not credit, not even his name remembered. Just technique that works. Lives that continue. Promise kept to a dying friend. Pat Donnelly fell from a tree following rules. Tommy broke rules and lived to save others. That was always the choice. Follow doctrine and die, or defy doctrine and survive. Tommy chose survival, chose innovation, chose saving lives over following orders. Army punished him. History forgot him. Manual stole from him. But soldiers worldwide use his technique. And that's enough. That was always enough. Remember his name. Thomas Sullivan, Private U.S. Army, court-martialed for heroism. Forgotten by history, remembered by no one except the soldiers who lived because of him, and the families who exist because those soldiers came home. That's enough. That's legacy. That's how real innovation happens. In frozen mud, under fallen trees, by men who refuse to watch friends die following rules that don't work. Tommy Sullivan, age 22, Philadelphia, deer hunter, rule breaker, lifesaver, forgotten hero, the world barely noticed. But the men who held that sector of the Hurricane noticed. They lived because he kept his promise. That was always enough for Tommy, and in the end, it's enough for history too.